Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of Good Enough Chats. My name is Dan Bowsher, and today I'm joined by Tom, who I will introduce you to very shortly. But before I do that, I just wanted to give first-time viewers a quick overview of what Good Enough Chats is all about. Essentially, this is about trying to destigmatize men's mental health by having a different guest on each show who is very kindly going to open up and talk about their lived experiences of mental health, um, because we know that if you can see people like Dave at the desk next door is going through stuff as well, then if you need some support, if you need some help, that might help you take those first steps to get some positive support, and to help you through difficult time. Just a quick note about how this is structured, because I think it's really important that you understand this as well. Um, Tom, as with all of our guests, has seen the questions beforehand. It's the same 5 questions that we use to structure every conversation. So he knows exactly what's coming. And there are no sort of curveballs in there. That said, I don't know what's coming in terms of his answers. So if there are interesting routes that I can spot that I want to take the conversation down, then we may go off on a couple of tangents at times as well. And Tom also knows that if at any point we start to stray into territory that he's not comfortable talking about, he just has to say, and we'll pull straight back and we'll get back on track. And because it's really important to me that anybody that is coming forward to share their story like this feels like they have as much control over it and the safety and security that they need to do that effectively. So that's a bit of the structure. That's why we're here. And on that note, Tom, please could you introduce yourself to our audience?
Certainly can. Hey everybody, I'm Tom Pauc. I'm 33. I'm based in Winchester in Hampshire, and I'm a senior podcast manager. So interesting to be on the other side of the fence today.
Yes, it is. And I noticed that you've got much better gear than I do.
It's all the
um,
pretense, Dan.
it's just a sham. It's just a sham. That full disclosure, actually, Tom and I worked together. I think it was probably 8 years ago,
Yeah,
maybe
8, 9
slightly
years
longer.
ago. Yeah, it's been a
Yeah,
while. Yeah.
yeah. So that's how Tom and I know each other. Tom's seen some of the previous episodes on the channel. He's been a real sort of advocate for this project, but also mental health in wider terms, and reached out to me and said he'd be interested in sharing his story. So delighted to have you on board, Tom, and to be reunited in this context
Yes.
as well.
No,
Um,
thank you so much for having me. Your openness and vulnerability in the past has been really impactful for me personally. So I thought when you decided to do this project, I thought, well, actually, this is a chance for me to open up and be vulnerable and share my story as well. So yeah, thank you for having me.
oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. So let's explore that a little bit more then. So the first
Mm.
question of the 5 is, why are you here today? What's got you to the point where you are sharing your mental health experiences?
I've always been an advocate for mental health among friends and family. Really, for the last 12 years, I've been very open in talking about therapy and the importance. I know this show focuses more on men, but for everyone to sort of be vulnerable. Um, so I thought this was a good opportunity for me to kind of extend that. There are lots of groups at work that talk about mental health. I'm sort of more weirdly more introverted at work, and I
Mm.
thought actually I need to. Yeah, I'm passionate about this, so why not actually extend the conversation? And if somebody comes away and listens to this and feels just 10% better about their own situation, or listens and feels, oh, actually, I'm kind of feeling that similar thing and feels an element of being reassured, then that's all I need really. That's that, that's helping others, and that's great. Um, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. So, how was your last week been? This is kind of I guess, the leveler that takes the conversation away from potentially more hypothetical to kind of the here and now. How has your last week been?
Well, you've probably caught me an interesting time in that sense, in that my mental health has been a bit up and down. certainly the last couple of months, and it's something I've been actively managing and just trying to work through. I mean, we were meant to chat last week, right? And I just said, look, actually, can we just have another week just so I can collect my thoughts a little bit longer? Um, but yeah, I think it's probably because in my personal life and certainly my professional life, I'm at this sort of this junction where I'm trying to work out what's next, and I'm trying to figure out what's the next goal, what's the next target to work towards. That's
Mm.
probably more professional, but and I think because of that, not having that goal in sight, there has been a sort of it has affected my mental health definitely, because there's been a lack of focus there. It's like, well, what am I working towards? And that, and then other stuff in the background that we all have, in day-to-day life. That has definitely, been a bit of a challenge, and that's probably a summary of the last week, if I'm being completely transparent.
Mm. And what have you been able to do, I guess, over that last week that's kind of helped you to manage all of those kind of feelings, those emotions? I mean, you mentioned it. We were going to talk last week. You asked to put it back, which is obviously no issue whatsoever. But what have you been able to do to kind of help yourself over those days in between?
Um, That's a good question. I think probably be a bit kinder to myself. Like we worked together 8, 9 years ago, and that's a big difference probably, in that I would have been quite tough on myself in like trying to work out, what are you doing? Get there, and have this expectation. And actually,
Mm.
it's probably a case of, and in the last week, it's like it will come. Just let's build. Let's take our time. And then just try and work on daily things that I can be in control of, and I know that will have a better impact on me. Can I sleep well? Can I exercise? Can I go and speak and see friends, have a good time? Things
Mm.
that can just kind of keep things in motion. Give you that sort of that buzz afterwards after doing it. If I can do that day by day, then I know that over time I'll get back on where I need to be,
Yeah,
and take it from there.
yeah. Breaking stuff down into sort of small tasks and then forming micro habits and the cumulative benefit of all of that.
I tell you what, it's very those American books, the sort of
Mm.
Atomic Habits and the Slight Edge, and but that is kind of true, that if you can work out those daily disciplines, that will make a difference. When
Yeah.
I was a kid, I used to have this thing at New Year. I'd be like, New Year, new me. I'd be 15. I'd be like, right, I'm gonna put on this music to motivate myself. I'm gonna become this person. It doesn't work like that. You
Mm.
have to you have to be kinder to yourself, and then those daily disciplines and simple things to start with. And if ever I'm in a lull, or I've overworked myself, which is a continual habit, that I'll burn myself out, and then it's like recovery for a few weeks and then start over again. It is simple disciplines to kind of kick that off.
Mm. And I guess like if millions of people can arbitrarily decide that January the 1st is the day that they're going to be the new me, then anyone could decide that any of the other 364 days of the year could equally be the point at which they start. Arguably, giving themselves more chance because it's a decision they've arrived at when they're ready, as opposed to a
Yeah.
decision that they feel they have to follow on from. Awesome. Okay. So so let's talk about how your relationship with your mental health has evolved. Where did you first start to realize that you were struggling with things, and how has that shifted over time?
Well, there's two parts to the story. It begins September 2012. Uh, I cycled with a friend to Barcelona from the top of France. It was a post-uni thing that we wanted to do. He was a cyclist, and I was a willing participant in the project. And we did that over the 11 days. And on the 10th day, we crossed the border into Spain, and we're with concierge at the hotel, and we're chatting away. And he says, "What are you up to?" He says, "Oh, we're cycling to Barcelona." He's like, "Oh, that's amazing." And he says, "Well, when are you going to get there?" We're like, "Oh, tomorrow." And he says, "Don't go there tomorrow. Don't do it. It's they're protesting for independence for Catalonia, and it's going to be chaos." So we took that on board and ignored it. And we went in the next day. And yeah, I mean, it was just a sort of a build-up of events. But the last 20 miles, we ran out of water. All the shops, everything was closed. We were in the mountains. It was 35-degree heat. We'd already cycled about 800 miles before, so we were pretty tired, at
Yeah.
that point. We then get into the city, and we're trying to get to the Sagrada, the Gothic cathedral, but we end up going to Barcelona Cathedral. We're going the wrong direction, but we end up getting caught up in the crowd, and we're boxed in where it's so packed we can't move, and we've obviously got our gear with us. And we were in this alleyway. In the heat was hitting us, and still hadn't had a drink. And this is hours, later. And we sat there, and I was thinking, what's going to happen now? This isn't cool. This isn't fun. Starting to have a few worries creeping in, and the protesting itself wasn't aggressive. It wasn't rioting. But it was, you're in a different country. You're boxed in. All these other circumstances. And eventually, after a few hours, we get some water. We get to the finish line at about 9 p.m. at night, which was 5 or 6 hours later than what we were anticipating. And then a friend of mine that I was playing rugby with had flown over, and we stayed up late that night catching up and probably talk about sport, talking about girls, and the sort of typical thing that a 21-year-old would be talking about. And went to bed really late, and I say that deliberately. And we got up the next day to do a tour of the city before flying out the following morning. And we got to the Olympic Stadium where Linford Christie won gold in '92. Beautiful backdrop, an amazing setup. We go into the stadium, we do this tour, and then I think he went off to see another section of the Olympic Park, essentially as it was. And
Hmm.
I went outside, and it's this big open space, and there was in the distance there was this tall Telefonica tower, tall thin tower, and I looked at it, and my balance started to feel a bit funny, and I was thinking, well, this is odd. What's going on here? Like, so my immediate instinct was like, get back in the stadium and be sort of under the shelter. And I was just, I remember at the time I was thinking that was just really, really odd, really
Hmm.
strange. And then we went to the new camp, the football stadium. It's kind of sunken in the ground where it's not a tall structure, but inside it obviously goes down and it's
Big
enormous and
bowl.
big bowl. And we did a stadium tour, and we were at the top of the seats as part of the tour where the media sit. And I'm not good with heights anyway, and I was clearly spooked from whatever had happened before. So I immediately rushed down and got away from that. And we're in the taxi. We're going back into the center of town by the Sagrada, which is this obviously big, tall structure. And I'm getting worked up again, thinking, well, am I going to feel what I just felt at the Olympic Stadium?
Hmm.
So I'm on my phone, and I'm sort of, what's the fear of a tall structure? Because I was just totally perplexed as to what was going on. And it came up with this thing called batophobia. And I was with my friends. I was like, oh, I've got batophobia. That's hilarious. But sunk in. And it was something that then has been with me ever since, in that whenever I go to somewhere new, particularly a big built up place, there is this sort of an anxiety, I would call it now, where I'm expecting, what am I going to encounter? So it's almost become a fear of the fear. So
Wow.
that is something 12 years ago where my mental health journey starts, in that before that, I would have said, come on, get a grip. Obviously, in that time, the mental health conversation, these types of conversations have evolved massively, where we talk about it a lot more and there's a lot more acceptance. But that was the point at which it started. And I was appreciating that, you know, when I've had bad instances like that, I'd rather have a broken leg. It's in terms of what I'm feeling, because it's, yeah, my empathy for it, my understanding and sympathy is completely different to what it would have been pre that experience.
Yeah, and understandably. So how does that affect you now? You mentioned there like the anxiety that you feel sometimes. What's that like? How could you give me an example of like, well, that was 12 years ago. So how would that affect you today, for example?
It still does. It's still something that I'm very much working on. I think I'm probably at a point now where I'm more determined than ever to try and sort it out. there were instances when I was a child that would kind of relate back as to why I would have been triggered at that moment at the stadium, albeit years and years later. But
Hmm.
today, I mean, if I go anywhere reasonably built up and it's new, I'm getting anxious. I'm getting wound up as to what I might see. It's a fear. It's not even, the rational side of me can look at it and think, well, it's whether it's a tall structure or an open space, whatever. I mean, why are you getting bothered by that? I can see that, I can understand that rational thinking, but for whatever reason, is that when I get into that moment, there is this sort of expectation I'm going to feel it. So it has
Yeah.
become this fear of the fear. Um,
Yeah.
so
Well, that's a
it's still to this day, if I try and travel, it's I went to Edinburgh last summer as a part of, wanted to go, and this is a good opportunity that's not an enormous city by any means, but a good progress. And I struggled. I really did struggle. And there are different factors involved where if it's a bright blue sky, it's worse than if it's cloudy because it's almost like you're a bit more sheltered. I mean, it doesn't make sense really, but that's how I feel in that moment.
so help me to understand. Is it batophobia? I've not heard of it before, and I imagine the majority of people that
No,
are
I
listening to
probably
this
haven't.
won't have heard of it either. So is it you kind of initially said that it was the kind of the tall structures, looking up at the tall structures that had kind of seemed to bring it on when you were in Barcelona, but is it more sort of just feeling like you're exposed because of the big openness above?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I had a moment at it's called Le Bourget Airport in Paris when I was about 5 or 6, and there was this tall rocket. It's this aviation museum as part of the airport, and there was this
Yeah.
tall rocket, very thin, very tall. And I remember as a child, of 5 or 6, I remember I didn't like it for whatever reason. I couldn't tell you why, but I was something had spooked me, and then we went off into a Concorde or whatever, as part of and I completely forgot about it. But
Hmm.
um, obviously something at that point had started it, and then it got, the circumstances were perfect in Barcelona to, lack of sleep, physical exhaustion, um, where yeah, I was probably more vulnerable at that point
Hmm.
where it kicked it off. But even to this day, I'm still explaining it. I can understand why people are thinking, well, how does that work? How does that? Well, I'd like to know some of that myself still, but um, I guess part of the reason why I mention it is because I think dealing with that and dealing with low moods and depression, and I've had moments where I've struggled, it's still the same principles that apply,
Hmm.
um, and they interlink. So that's a part of the reason why I'd reference it. And I think it's important people know it's we all have irrational phobias, and that then transcends into something else that becomes a bigger anxiety. So
Yeah, 100%. And that's the thing with a phobia, isn't it? It is irrational. It's an
yeah,
agoraphobia. You know that, especially if you're in the UK, spiders aren't going to kill you. But people are still scared of spiders, like they're the size of a lion and they're coming at you with claws and fangs and things. It's just it is completely irrational, isn't it? And I think the okay, I'm going to tell you something that isn't widely publicly known. My phobia is niche. It's very niche,
join the
and it.
club.
Um, so I have a phobia of collarbones. I the idea of things coming into contact with my collarbone makes me just immediately like,
Okay.
oh God, I hate that. The idea people touching my collarbones, horrible. When I see other people, particularly people that are slim and they've got
Oh
really
yeah, yeah, yeah,
exposed,
yeah. Very
that
exposed.
just makes me cringe. And there was absolutely there was nothing that I could point to that says, well, that's because this happened. It's just a thing. I absolutely hate it. And unfortunately, I have a nemesis or two that knows this, and
Oh
that,
wow.
and they may or may not be my children, and and they like to kind of every now and again just come up behind me and put their hand on my shoulder like that, and I'll go, ah! So, mine is it's niche and it's not something that I have to think about too much in
Mm,
advance. I don't have the anxiety about it. I just have like an immediate physical reaction
right.
to it when it happens. But, people have phobias, and now I've exposed that for myself. So
There you go. It's out there.
be kind to my collarbones, these people. So let's you mentioned as well. So the two things, so the bathophobia and the depression, the bouts of depression that you've experienced and low mood. Are you okay to talk about that
Yeah.
as well?
Yeah, of course.
So when did you first notice that that was something that you were dealing with?
What, low moods and depression?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, also, I know we say we're not medical experts. I don't know what the line is at which you sort of cross over and say I'm depressed versus a low mood that may be sustained for a few weeks. So
Mm,
I couldn't tell you where on that threshold I was, but there are two instances in particular that stand out where I just, yeah, I was in a, yeah, lack of motivation and very upset, very upset constantly. Interestingly, with that, there was always something underneath where I knew you'll get through this. There was always an underlying layer of optimism.
mm,
Um, that never left. I don't know whether that, if ever something happened again like that, whether that would still be there. I'd hope so. But yeah, I've had two instances like that. But like I say, I still felt in those moments that yeah, you'll be all right. You'll get through this. I know I'm going through something at the moment. I have to get through it, but you'll find a way.
mm. You've always struck me as, I guess this is one of the benefits of speaking to people in these chats who I've known
Mm,
for some time, is that you've always come across to me as somebody who is optimistic and um, bright. I mean, not bright as in smart, you are, but bright as in present and um, a source of energy
I appreciate
for
that.
other people. Um, I guess the reason I say that is because I think it's really important for people that haven't experienced low mood and depression how different the perception and the reality can be of
Mm,
people. People who seem to be dealing with things absolutely fine, or even seem to be dealing with things really well, can also, in the background, be going through a pretty torrid period where they're just, for whatever reason, they're feeling that kind of disconnect.
that's what
Um,
that's what not to turn it around, but that's what I felt listening to your story, hand on heart, genuinely, and that when you were open about your challenges, post corporate life and what you'd gone through, how you felt, my initial reaction was, Dan, who was my manager at that job. What? I would never have and never would have guessed that. And I think that there's something in that you just never know. Um, yeah, it was really surprising, but also uplifting. And I thought, well, gosh, if Dan's feeling like that, then I can forgive myself for feeling like how I do.
I'm glad it served that purpose. Um, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because not to dwell on me, because this isn't about me, but I became aware that what I thought were very clear signals that I was projecting that things weren't all right. I wasn't projecting those signals at all
Mm,
to most of the people that I was sitting next to working with on a day-to-day basis. I thought it was really bloody obvious. I hadn't talked to them about how I was feeling, so why would they know? But apparently it wasn't obvious at all, and that was a bit of a wake up call for me as well. Um, but I need to do my version of this at some other point in time. This is about you, Tom. Um, so question four is basically what are the what are the key moments for you on your journey? So we've talked about kind of the origins of some of the dimensions your mental health experiences, but between realizing that something wasn't right and where you are today,
Mm.
have there been moments along the way where you've suddenly gone, "Oh, I get it. That works for me," or that people said that this was a thing to do, but that really hasn't worked for me. That's just not going to be the way that I deal with this.
The biggest one in the last couple of years is, and also I'd love to sit here and come up with something really snazzy and, you know, listen to it, I think, wow, that's epic. That's really
It's the
cool. I can take
podcaster in you. It's the
it is, it really is.
podcaster.
I know. No, it's as basic it is, it's sleep. That's the biggest thing, where noticing how I feel, particularly at work, um, and that correlating with a lack of sleep. I had a
Hmm.
moment last it's been last I think, yeah, last summer, and I have this thing where sometimes if I if I'm not content with the work that I've done, I'll keep going. Never a good thing, because then you end up just getting, it's a bit of a vicious cycle. But
Yeah.
um yeah, it was probably about 7:45 at work, and I was still there. There's a couple of others, but generally the building was empty. And I'd also remember thinking about a week before that, I thought, oh, gosh, I feel like I'm probably running on fumes, but damn, I still feel pretty good. Like, let's just keep
Hmm.
going. Let's keep pushing. And I'm very passionate about my work and what I do. I feel very fortunate to do what I do. But so, it's quite easy just to keep going because there's elements of it that I really enjoy. And it was about, yeah, 7:45, 8 p.m. It's still light outside. And suddenly this fire alarm goes off. And one of the studios, there was, I don't know, some electrical input that had gone wrong. So fire alarm goes off. Everyone who's still there goes outside, assembles at this point. And, the anxiety thing, the separate thing, stood outside. I'm not in control of the situation, which is another thing. Like, I need to sometimes be in control. I have to stand there with a group of others in this section of the campus in Southwest London. Sometimes if I haven't slept well, I do get a bit jittery because it's open spaces. It's I wouldn't say big buildings, but big concrete slabs. It can set me off. And we were stood there waiting for this fire alarm, and then I started to panic because I was like, I'm not sure if I can leave this situation, and I can't go back in the building, get my stuff and leave.
Hmm.
So I started to go through, I wouldn't say a panic attack, but I was starting to get wound up. So I quickly went across and went into the car park and and stayed there, um, under the shelter, and waited until I could hear this thing had stopped. And oh, I don't know what's going on there.
I think you might have reactions turned
I
on
think
your
I have
on
reactions
your
on.
Zoom.
And yeah, fireworks happen basically.
Yeah,
And
literally.
yeah, literally.
I love that. I
um,
love that. That's not happened before, one of these.
I, I must have switched something on. I apologize. Um, yeah, and so then I was verging on a sort of a panic attack, I suppose. And then it hit me. I was like, you are not looking after yourself properly. And part of that is that you're still here at 8 p.m. and also you're not sleeping great. You haven't probably taken, you'll probably roll your eyes because I did this when we worked together, but probably haven't taken enough annual leave recently to kind of rest up, you know. And then suddenly I was having this moment where I was like, okay, you need to switch off now, and then suddenly you're going into this reaction mode to try and get yourself back to a normal state. And that might be a week off of doing very little just to get yourself back to that point, of which that's, you're not doing anything, you're not going away, it's not particularly exciting, you're just trying to get yourself rested
Yeah.
essentially. um yeah, and a couple of moments like that of you know sort of reinforce that you need to sleep better. You need to get good sleep, not
Mm.
be scrolling on your phone late at night and, getting into bad habits where you can stay up. It's very easy for me to stay up late and, get into a cycle, of going to bed too late, and then, the next morning, then you're struggling. And that, with mental health, and particularly with the anxiety, I sometimes on the second floor at work, and there's this sort of open foyer where you can look across, and it's not really that high up. But if I haven't slept, I'm jittery walking across that point. If I have slept fine, I'm fine. I'm totally in control of it. It's not a problem. Yeah, I'll look over. It's great. That's that's the difference it can make. And that's probably in the last 2 years where I've noticed that substantially more than I would have done before. And it's part of those, those daily things that we reference that you need to get right in order to, give yourself a chance, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, that, I mean, that's the level of self-awareness that you have to be able to kind of to have identified that and to be able to focus on doing addressing that as well as you can is absolutely commendable. There are many people that go on for decades without realizing that it's the lack of sleep or an equivalent that is causing them those problems. Could you give like Tom? Okay, so Tom is not a professional sleepologist, whatever the word is.
No,
But Tom, could you give me like a couple of like specific pieces of examples rather of things that you do that help you get better sleep? More if you can think of off the top of it. You mentioned like not having the doom scrolling and
the,
things
the
like
the
that.
phone is the big one. I mean, even in day-to-day life, and this sort of you see so much of it on social media about sort of the dopamine hit of you're checking something on Instagram, or you're checking something on, could be LinkedIn, for example,
Mm,
wherever. Um, that is, yeah, something I want to readdress. But specifically to your question, I think, yeah, putting your phone away. I think just reading, actually, I think that
mm,
would be so much better. And that's something that I've started recently a lot more, is just, yeah, reading before bed, because I think that's a natural way in which you're not staring at a screen that's like hitting the back of your brain with the light and everything. It's
yeah.
and you will tire out quicker, I think. And it's something, I guess, slightly productive about it. So it's a
Mm,
it's a double win in that sense. And then just
mm.
making sure that, I don't know, not trying to, if you can get there like 10 p.m., I think that's a good, for me at least. I think if I start going later, then I might start getting more wired, and then I'm staying up later and later. Um, but yeah, I'm not an expert by any means, but I know when I've had a good sleep and when I haven't. Um,
It's interesting what you say. I sometimes I remember not to take the phone upstairs with me, leave it downstairs. Um, but there is a absolutely direct correlation between um, how much I read and how good I am in terms of my relative spectrum of contentment and mental health.
mm,
So I know that if I'm not an avid reader, I've never have been. So like
no,
this
me
year,
neither.
I'm sort of I'm upping the amount that I read, and I'm trying to read book a month over for the whole of the year, or the equivalent of a book a month for the whole year, which is way more than I would normally be reading. And it's working. And I think the two things that have made it work, one are the intent behind it, wanting to make sure that I do it because I know I'm happier when I'm reading. And the other is actually, and this sounds like such a daft thing, because I'm not an avid reader, I don't have this immense reading list of things that I really want to read. I've got a very short list. So I started off by making sure that I got those books so I could read the books I knew I already wanted to read as opposed to one that someone had handed to me and I might like. Um, so
But
those
but
two
that's
things
that's a
combined.
really good point, because if we go back to the New Year version of, oh, New Year, new me, writing out 20 different books that I'm going to read. Well, there's probably part of the reason why you probably didn't do it is because you got overwhelmed.
Mm, yeah, yeah, it's 100%. And there are certain aspects that um, of kind of these sort of challenge not challenges. these goals. That's the word you use right at the start. Having sort of mini goals that I think I can stretch myself on now. I know I can afford to stretch myself because I believe that I've got the staying power to do it. Reading isn't one of those. If I'm going to read 20 books in a year, it's not going to happen. I'm just not going to do it. Whereas if I say to myself, all right, I want to read roughly a book a year, a book a month for the year, that's 12 books. Well, I'm already six down and I'm halfway through May. So, that's doable. I'm doing this
You're
year. I'm
doing
doing
great.
this running challenge, right? Where I'm running it's this thing called the Conqueror Challenge, and it is from Land's End to John O'Groats, but it's a very scenic route um, via across the whole of the south coast first, and then up. But it
Oh,
means that I
wow.
have to run roughly 20 miles a week for the whole year. So that's the discipline that I've got into, and it's halfway through May, and I've covered 36% of the distance. And some weeks I've done more than 20, some weeks I've done less than 20. But it's a reason to get out there and do it because I know regular running is something that makes me happy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that I can stretch myself on. Reading, no, no stretch. Not this time anyway. Um, okay, we're on to this. I mean, this has flown by this conversation. I really enjoyed it. We're already on the final question, Tom.
Blimey.
Believe it. Um, so the final question is, if somebody came to you today, maybe they've seen this conversation, heard this conversation, and they have been dealing with a similar situation to you. Based on your experience, what is the most important thing that they can do?
I'm sure it'd be similar to what most would say, but it's setting up contact, someone you can talk to, basically. Whether it's talking about low mood or whether it's a more specific niche like an anxiety or a phobia, having someone you can talk to and try and even if they're just listening, I think there's something that you're always going to feel better for it. And I don't think anybody's ever going to turn around and be negative. I was thinking before the chat, if you were sat somewhere and a Vinnie Jones type came up, came sat down next to you, and quite a bit of a hard geezer basically, and he said, you know what, actually, I'm struggling with my mental health. My respect for that person goes up tenfold.
Mm,
So that's why I'd encourage, go and speak to somebody. It's yeah, I'm sure everyone's going to say the same thing, but it's only going to help you, and maybe it'll even help them as well.
mm. Do you know what? That absolutely spot on with the point about making sure that you talk to somebody. But the second part of that about maybe it will help them, it couldn't be more true. I've said it before um, in these chats. Um, there is a cathartic benefit to anybody else that is involved in these conversations. So this whole exercise with good enough chats, I think it's beneficial for people to hear it. I think it's beneficial for the guest to share it. And hand on heart, it's absolutely beneficial for me because every time I do it, it reaffirms to me that plenty of other people are going through difficult times, they're going through tricky periods. Everybody struggles, and any sort of latent doubts or concerns that I've got about things that might be affecting me, I'm kind of reassured that it's okay. That's perfectly
Yeah,
normal. So you're absolutely right. The telling the story, hearing the story, prompting the story, all of those things have benefit to each person involved in it and can be incredibly powerful as a result.
I think even if you're going through a really tough period, if you were to hear about somebody else being open and honest about their own vulnerabilities that may relate closely to what you're experiencing, I can only be uplifting, right? In that I'm not alone in this. And there
Mm.
is a sign there that, oh, that person actually went through a very similar situation but got through it, and they seem great. Well, that's a great message, isn't it?
I hope so. Yeah, and I hope it resonates with people. And on that point, Tom, I just want to say thank you for coming forward and
Thank you for
for
having me.
sharing your story. I know it's going to be helpful for other people to hear this, to see this, and to realize that what they're dealing with might not be as bad as they perhaps think it is, and that there are things that they can do to get themselves into a better place. So I really, really appreciate it. If anyone has seen this um, and they want to get in touch with you, is it okay for them to find you on
Absolutely.
LinkedIn?
Yeah. I said to you before, I'd be flattered if they did actually, so please do.
Awesome. In that case, Tom, I'm going to include in the description of this your LinkedIn URL so people can go straight to that if they want to get in touch with you. Um, that's the end of this episode. So, once again, thank you to Tom. Thank you to everybody that has listened, has watched through the conversation. I hope you found it as interesting and useful as I've certainly found this one. Um, we have a whole range of other conversations already on the channel that you can go and look through. There are people or blokes of different age groups who've had very different experiences, all talking about their what they've done to help themselves come through it. So please do check that out. Like, subscribe, review, recommend. What are all the
All
other
of it.
options? Comment, um, uh, give it as a gift. Whatever it is that you can do wherever you see
Kudos.
this content. Yeah, kudos. Yeah, double thumbs up. No, don't do that, Tom. You'll get reactions. No, oh no, sad times.
Didn't work that time.
No reactions. But no, any support that you can give to help this to travel a little bit further is appreciated. And of course, if you would like to talk to me about coming onto the show and being a guest on a future episode, all of the contact details are in the description. I'd love to hear from you and to keep this momentum going. So thank you very much, everybody. We will be back again soon with another episode of Good Enough Chats.